Tonight on Bridge City News, a big announcement is made in Lethbridge today involving the iconic Nikkei Yuko Japanese Garden. We have the details. A quit smoking program with Alberta Health Services has made its way to the town of Taber. And we hear from former UCP member Derek Vilderbrand, who explains what sets his new Freedom Conservative Party of Alberta apart from the Tories. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Soon, most of Canada will be able to experience what the Nikkei Yuko Japanese Garden has to offer. They're launching a partnership with the Lethbridge Lodging Association. The garden will now be accessible to the Canadian marketplace, which will allow tourists and companies from all over the world to check out the beautiful garden that our city has to offer. This will be the first time their winter product will be launched, which includes the Winter Light Festival. Executive Director Michelle Day is confident that the project will make Lethbridge a popular tourist attraction this winter, providing economic growth locally.
Tourism is really the front door to non-tourism economic development, and we want to make sure when people are coming to Lethbridge, they are seeing a signature attraction that our community can be proud of to raise the bar for everybody.
Lethbridge is a special place, and we believe in the small businesses that exist in the city, the artists that reside here and present, and so we're absolutely thrilled with this partnership.
You will now be able to access all of the events online as well at visitlethbridge.com. The City of Lethbridge has become more environmentally friendly with their weed control. As part of a pilot project, the city has brought in a herd of goats to Cottonwood Park. The little grazers are from a farm near McGrath and will be targeting vegetation located near the walking paths, which are more difficult to mow the traditional way. If the project is successful this year, the city could expand the project next year with goats in other parts of the city.
Because if we were to come in and treat all this for invasive species with chemical, manpower, mowing, machinery, your bills are going to be massive. And we simply don't have the manpower to do that. We have goat power, which is, I think, if you were to do the cost comparisons, and I haven't yet, I think the goats are way more manageable. They work pretty cheap and they're pretty happy, so.
They seem to eat everything that nothing else wants. And the biggest plus is any weed seeds, they're the only animal that does not pass the seeds through the rumen. So every other animal will eat and spread seeds, and the goats, it kills them.
Weather permitting, the 200 goats are expected to remain on the job for a few weeks. A stop smoking program is making its way to the town of Taber. Alberta Health Services Quit Core will run on 6 consecutive Wednesday evenings beginning November 7th at the Taber Health Centre. The Quit Core program teaches tobacco users how to develop a plan to quit while providing strategies to address recovery symptoms and manage stress. For more information about the Quit Core program, call the toll-free number you see on the screen, 1-866-710-QUIT, or check out the website, albertaquits.ca. The AHS has set up a mobile mammography trailer at the Red Cliff Library just outside of Medicine Hat. It is for women to do a screen test for breast cancer. A mammogram is an X-ray of the breast, which has proven to be one of the most effective ways to detect breast cancer. The trailer will be set up until November the 19th. To book an appointment, call 1-800-667-0604. And to check out a complete list of screen test mobile sites, visit the website you see at the bottom of the screen. November 13th is a pretty big day in Calgary. That is when a plebiscite will be held to ask residents if they want to host the 2026 Winter Olympics and Paralympics. The estimated cost to host the Games is $5.2 billion. The Calgary 2026 Bid Corporation has proposed a $3 billion public investment split equally between the city, province, and the federal government. The Alberta government has already committed $700 million. Calgary, Stockholm, Sweden, and a combined Italian bid from Milan Cortina were approved, but word is now Stockholm is not as interested. A rap music artist from Calgary died over the weekend in an airplane stunt. 34-year-old John James McMurray died when performing a stunt on the wing of an airplane near Vernon, BC. His management team says the rapper slipped off the wing of a Cessna that fell into a downward spiral and didn't have time to pull his chute. He hit the ground and died instantly. The pilot of the plane was able to land safely. 2 men appeared in court today in the alleged abduction of 48-year-old Aurora Rafer of Red Deer. A witness called police last Wednesday after seeing a woman apparently being forced into a pickup truck at a gas station. Police say the woman and 1 man were located that afternoon, while a second man was arrested that evening. 47-year-old Ernest Ward is charged with kidnapping, sexual assault, and uttering threats, while 25-year-old David Gallinger is also charged with kidnapping. First, it was Maxime Bernier forming his own party, and now Derek Fildebrandt has followed suit. The only difference is one is federal and the other is provincial. Fildebrandt officially launched his new Freedom Conservative Party of Alberta recently. The Brooks MLA says, like the UCP, he will focus on abolishing the carbon tax and cutting government spending. Derek Fildebrandt joins me now via Skype. Mr. Fildebrandt, what really sets you apart from the other mainstream parties?
Well, we're conservatives, but we're freedom conservatives. We're not the establishment Tory party. We believe Albertans need an option that is not the big government socialism of the NDP or the big business establishment of the Tories. We want to be a party for the little guy. We're grassroots, driven by the bottom up, not from the leader top down. And we're uncompromising conservatives. We're not going to be all things to all people. We're going to stand by our beliefs.
Now, what do you say to your critics who say all you're really doing is splitting the right vote?
No, we're not. Well, first of all, the Freedom Conservative Party is only going to run candidates in constituencies where the NDP have no realistic shot of winning to begin with. For example, in my constituency, Strathmore Brooks, you could run 8 Conservatives based on the results of the last election, and the NDP would still not win. It's a mathematical impossibility. But in the last election, vote splitting, so-called, isn't what got the NDP elected. It was Tory arrogance and corruption.
What about all of the other previous controversies, including charging meals to your MLA expense account? Will they hurt your campaign?
Well, I'm finally speaking out about what the truth is. Most of it is complete BS, lies made up. If you're talking meals, $197 over 2.5 years for a small accounting error, that was a complete blip. So, I've made some mistakes. I take responsibility for them. Unlike most politicians who just don't take any responsibility. I've made real mistakes. I take responsibility for them. But I'm tired of not speaking out when there's lies and smears from the media and political opponents who try to score cheap points based on lies. One thing that really sets us apart is that we're not afraid of what the NDP or the media will say about us. In the last spring session of the legislature, the NDP put forward all sorts of radical legislation, like Bill 9, that banned pro-life protesters in Alberta. And the Tories cowardly ran out of the legislature almost 14 different times to avoid voting on it because they were afraid of the names that the media and the NDP would call them. I was there. I debated for probably almost a dozen hours on that bill, put forward almost a dozen amendments to it to try and balance both freedom of speech and protecting people from harassment. I voted against the NDP more times in the legislature than any other MLA of any party by a massive margin.
Derek Fildebrandt, leader of the new Freedom Conservative Party of Alberta, thanks a lot for joining me. By the way, Albertans go to the polls in the spring of 2019. In Manitoba, a backbencher has been kicked out of the PC Party caucus for repeated inappropriate behavior. Emerson MLA Cliff Graydon will sit as an independent after he admitted to making inappropriate comments to at least one female staff member and announced he was going on medical leave. Media reports said Graydon invited 2 women to sit on his lap and invited another to lick food off of his face. He also caused controversy earlier this year by calling illegal border crossers a drain on society. The Tory caucus released a statement saying it acted after it became apparent previous efforts to address inappropriate behavior had not succeeded. The Canadian Union of Postal Workers is turning up the heat, moving its rotating job action to Toronto. Canada Post says since Toronto is a key processing hub, the 24-hour walkout could cause delays in mail and parcel deliveries across the country. Canada Post says every effort will be made to minimize the impact on its customers. The union says Canada Post needs to address issues that have stemmed from the explosive growth of parcel deliveries, including health and safety concerns. Rotating strikes have already hit Edmonton, Victoria, Windsor, and Halifax. Federal Conservative MP Michelle Rempel says the Liberals are taking a nothing-to-see-here approach on Islamic State returnees in Canada. A Tory motion is demanding the government take steps including greater use of peace bonds.
We have not seen any charges laid for the over 60 ISIS returnees that we now know who walk free in Canada. This is why today Canada's Conservatives have put forward a motion to demand action from the Canadian government so that justice can finally be served. The Liberals have had 3 years to take action in this regard and have failed to do so. They have prioritized the reintegration of these terrorists as opposed to finding ways to bring them to justice, and this is wrong. Today, Andrew Scheer's Conservatives call upon Justin Trudeau to do the following. Focus first on bringing the perpetrators of genocide and terrorist acts to justice and ensure that courts have access to evidence gathered against suspected terrorists. strive to keep Canadians safe from those who are suspected of committing such acts of terrorism or genocide abroad but have returned to Canada by ensuring that security agencies would be adequately resourced to provide high levels of monitoring and surveillance of their activities in Canada.
Turkey's President Erdogan has promised family members of slain Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi that Turkey will do all it can to shed light on his murder. Officials in Turkey say Erdogan called Khashoggi's son Abdullah to express his condolences. Saudi Arabia says the journalist, who was a critic of the royal family, was killed in a fistfight. Erdogan contends Khashoggi was the victim of a savage murder that was planned days in advance. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari says it appears as though Khashoggi's death was ordered through a Skype call.
There is this kind of social media mastermind that has been working for the royal family, using these modern technologies in order to carry out political plays for the royal family. And it seems as though, according to this report, that this individual carried out or was basically giving the orders for Khashoggi's murder via Skype.
Watch my full interview with Lisa Daftari as we discuss some of the biggest stories from around the globe coming up in the second half of our show. As thousands of Central American migrants resume the trek towards the U.S. border, the UN Refugee Agency warned today of the need to provide humanitarian assistance.
Of particular concern for us at the moment is the developing humanitarian situation among this group, with many people having food, water, health and other needs. There's also kidnapping and security risks in areas the caravan may venture into. Stabilizing the situation is therefore urgent. The caravan, which as you probably know has been estimated at up to 7,000 people or more in size, is the second organized march in the region this year. There was another in April in Mexico. We are working in support of the Mexican authorities. Our teams are providing not just staffing but technical help to ensure timely registration of asylum seekers, setting up of identification and referral mechanisms for those who have specific vulnerabilities and needs. And the responsibilities that all countries have along this route is really the same. It's that individuals fleeing persecution and violence need to be given access to territory and to refugee status determination procedures. If people who are fleeing persecution and violence enter one country, they need to be provided access to the asylum system.
It was on this date that a suicide blast kills U.S. Marines and sailors in Lebanon. Students in Hungary spark a Cold War revolt, and Tonight Show host Johnny Carson was born. This is Today in History for October the 23rd.
October 23, 1983. In Lebanon, a suicide truck bomb strikes U.S. Marine headquarters at Beirut International Airport. The blast kills 241 Marines and American sailors, part of an international peacekeeping force. At about the same time, another attack kills 58 French paratroopers. President Ronald Reagan.
We must not allow international criminals and thugs such as these to undermine the peace in Lebanon.
Within weeks, Reagan starts withdrawing U.S. forces from the Mideast country. 1956. In Eastern Europe, a Cold War uprising behind the Iron Curtain. Students in Hungary spark a spontaneous revolt against their communist rulers in the capital, Budapest. As the revolution spreads, Soviet forces enter the country, crushing the uprising within weeks. 1973. President Richard Nixon agrees to turn over White House tape recordings to Judge John J. Sirica. The tapes, sought by the Watergate special prosecutor, are a flashpoint in the scandal that ultimately drives Nixon from office. 2006. Former Enron CEO Jeffrey Skilling is sentenced to 24 months, 4 years in prison for his role in the company's 2001 collapse. Enron's demise wiped out thousands of jobs, more than $60 billion in market value, and more than $2 billion in pension plans at what had been the 7th largest company in the country. And 1925. Johnny Carson, TV's king of late night for 3 decades as host of NBC's The Tonight Show, is born in Corning, Iowa. Today in History, October 23rd, Carlotta Bradley, The Associated Press.
The dismal odds of winning the Mega Millions jackpot is 1 in 302 million. That means there are 302 million potential number combinations, or a little less than one combination for all 328 million people living in the United States.
I mean, both the Mega Millions and the Powerball, to win the jackpot is very, very long odds. I mean, the Mega Millions is about it's about 302 million to 1 shot, something like that. Powerball's a little better. It's like 292 million to 1.
Yeah.
But, you'd have to buy like hundreds of thousands or even millions of tickets before the odds get down to something reasonable. Mathematically speaking, every possible set of numbers could come out with the same chance. So it really doesn't matter. From a mathematical perspective, the best odds are not playing because you're virtually basically guaranteed to be throwing your money away. But then again, from a psychological perspective, the chance of winning, was it 1.5, 1.6 billion now is that thought makes people think about what could be.
That is one big jackpot. Lots of sunshine, but cooler today. Feels like we've hit the jackpot with Mother Nature here. The mild temperatures will continue over the next few days. I'll have all of the weather details coming up shortly. Another beautiful day in the Windy City. Tonight, mainly clear with a low near 6. Tomorrow, mainly sunny with a high near 16. Pretty much the same picture on Thursday. Friday, a mixture of sun and cloud and a high again near 16 degrees. Saturday, mainly clear with the mercury dropping down to 11. Sunday, sunny again with a high near 16. Looking at our almanac, the average high for this time of year is 12 degrees with an average low of -1. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1965 at 27 degrees, and the record low was a chilly -13 in 1991. Sunrise was at 8:05, sunset at 6:26. Let's have a look at how tomorrow's shaping up across the country. It'll be mainly cloudy and 14 degrees in Vancouver. Victoria will have a mixture of sun and cloud and a high of 13. Calgary will be overcast and 15. Edmonton mainly sunny and a high near 13 degrees. Sunshine and 16 on tap for Regina tomorrow. Lots of sunshine and 17 expected for Saskatoon. Mainly sunny and 10 for Winnipeg. Over in the central part of the country, Toronto will be partly cloudy at 9. Ottawa will have showers off and 9 degrees as well. Montreal will also have rain at 9. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will have periods of snow mixed with rain and a high of 3. Halifax, Nova Scotia will have rain and 14. Charlottetown, PEI will be rainy and 12. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, it'll be mainly cloudy and 9 degrees tomorrow. Ottawa says it will return 90% of all the money it collects from a carbon price directly to the Canadians who paid for it. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is unveiling the details of the carbon tax rebates as he tries to sell Canadians on the need to pay for pollution without breaking their pocketbooks. The rebates will only apply in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and New Brunswick. Those are the 4 provinces which have refused to impose their own carbon price. The fuel surcharge alone will raise about $2.3 billion in revenue next year, rising to $5.6 billion by the year 2022-2023. The baseline price on carbon will be $20 per metric ton, rising to $50 by the year 2022. Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland says it is in the interest of both countries to lift the U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. Freeland spoke after a meeting with Mexican officials.
Canada's view of the 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum imposed by the United States against Canada and very many countries in the world has been consistent. We believe these measures to be unjustified and illegal. That is why we are challenging them at the WTO and at NAFTA panels. And that is why Canada imposed on July 1st a measured, perfectly reciprocal, dollar-for-dollar retaliatory response. We also think that it is overwhelmingly in the best interest of both Canada and the United States for those reciprocal tariffs to be lifted.
Many believe Alberta is not quite out of the woods yet when it comes to recovering from the recession. Senior policy analyst Steve Lafleur with the Fraser Institute says the worst thing a government can do is increase corporate taxes, which makes it even tougher for an economy to recover.
One thing you don't want to do during a recession is increase taxes, especially increase corporate taxes, because if it's already challenging for private sector employers to create jobs in the province, making it even more expensive is probably not a good idea, especially when you don't really generate that much revenue off a corporate income tax increase to begin with. So I think we really need to be cautious about moves like that might seem politically appealing, but really can have some pretty substantial damage for the private sector economy.
Catch my full interview with Mr. Lafleur as we discuss how Canada can get back on track economically, coming up after business news. Alberta Premier Rachel Notley is telling Ottawa to get into the crude by rail business. She says Alberta heavy oil producers have been dealing with a large price gap between their product and the U.S. light oil. That amounts to money being diverted from the Canadian economy into American bank accounts. The difference is about $40 US per barrel. Notley says new coastal pipelines to get access to international markets are necessary to get Alberta producers a better price. In the meantime, she says the Liberals should look to invest in moving oil to market by rail cars. BMW says it is expanding a recall to cover 1.6 million vehicles around the world due to possible fuel leaks that could cause a fire. The German automaker says in some diesel vehicles, coolant could leak from the exhaust gas recirculation module, which is part of the emissions reduction system. The leaks could combine with soot at high temperatures and lead to a fire. Now here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, November 13th is a big day in Calgary. That is when a plebiscite will be held to ask residents if they want to host the 2026 Winter Olympics and Paralympics. The estimated cost to host the Games is $5.2 billion. When you see news happening, drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's top stories, check out our full newscast online at bridgecitynews.ca. The investigation into the death of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi continues, and our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari has the latest. We'll hear what Lisa has to say next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. The Rangeland Collectors Club is holding its annual fall sale October 27th and 28th at the Rocky Mountain Turf Club beginning at 10 a.m. Discover interesting antiques and collectibles with vendors from Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC. Admission is $3 and proceeds will go toward the Chinook Regional Hospital Children's Ward and Woods Homes Youth Organization. The Nigerian-Canadian Association of Lethbridge and Sobo Yijo Turning Point Foundation are presenting a symposium on global migration and Canadian immigration on Saturday, October 27th at the Main Public Library downtown Lethbridge from 2 to 5 p.m. Hear from top experts about the challenges and opportunities immigration presents to our communities and country. Admission is free and all are welcome. Big Brothers Big Sisters in Lethbridge is searching for volunteers to mentor children and youth in their various programs. Volunteers commit anywhere from 1 hour a week to 1 full year. They have many kids on their wait list that are looking for a big brother or sister. Make a difference in a child's life and start something big. For more information, call 403-328-9355 or email info.leth@bigbrothersbigsisters.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Many leaders around the world are not happy with what has been said from Saudi Arabia in regards to the death of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Now, you can add U.S. President Donald Trump's name to that list. Joining me now from Los Angeles is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Lisa, Trump is walking a fine line, demanding answers about Khashoggi's death, while at the same time working a $1 billion arms deal with the Saudis.
Yes, I think you pretty much summarized what the situation is, or what the uncomfortable situation is for the White House right now. You have Donald Trump, who is quite proud of the accomplishments that you could say that he has had with the Arab world because of the way he was able to approach and strike a deal with the Saudis, both with regards to national security in the region and with regards to a very lucrative arms deal, which you referenced. And now you have put into this mix a pressure from both sides here in the United States, as well as international pressure on Donald Trump to really go hard on the Saudis regarding the death of this journalist. It's interesting. It's interesting because human rights have never been a part of foreign policy deals here in the United States. You had President Obama strike a deal with the Iranian regime while we had Americans perishing away in Iranian prisons. We have deals with Turkey in the alliance against Syria, and we know what Turkey does day in and day out, rounding up journalists and policemen and judges and teachers, professors, closing down newspapers, etc. So the point is, we're not turning a blind eye to human rights, but we need to be consistent. What role will human rights play in the larger foreign policy deals that we're going to strike? We've already moved away from an allies type of foreign policy where you have a nation that's our ally, we're with them to the end on every subject, on every interest, etc. We've moved away from that. We now have an interest-aligned foreign policy here in the West, meaning that we do cozy up to countries that meet our needs for a particular topic. And with regards to the Middle East, Donald Trump was very much set on this realignment, moving away from the Shiite dominance of the Middle East, which was under the Iranian regime, growing its influence, and President Obama was very fond of that alliance. Donald Trump moved over to the Sunni alliance, which is run by the Saudis. Again, the Saudis, whatever they're doing, they're not being obviously transparent. It's an understatement. We're not getting the right answers. We're not getting those answers in time. And the details are trickling in very slowly and without corroboration. So, of course, it behooves the Saudis to be straightforward about this because of the optics alone. It's awful. Any loss of life is awful. But if you're asking me if I think this is a much larger issue, if the death of Khashoggi is symbolic of, a referendum on the Donald Trump foreign policy in the Middle East, I think this is going to blow over and it's not going to make any changes with regards to arms deals, with regards to how we view Saudi Arabia, and with regards to us relying on Saudi Arabia as a partner in the Middle East.
Now, the same way we're doing this interview via Skype is apparently the way a top aide for Saudi Crown Prince Salman ordered the death of Khashoggi. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, this is a very interesting development. That there is this kind of social media mastermind that has been working for the royal family, using these modern technologies in order to carry out political plays for the royal family. And it seems as though, according to this report, that this individual carried out or was basically giving the orders for Khashoggi's murder via Skype. Again, we don't have too much corroboration on any of these details. I'm very much looking forward to piecing this all together and understanding what happened in that consulate. From the moment he walked in to his death, what happened, how much of it was premeditated, how much of it wasn't, and how much of this is honest. This has become, the mystery of the week, and I think a lot of people are demanding answers, and it's on the shoulders of the Saudis to provide those answers.
Tens of thousands of people took to the streets in London, England recently wanting a referendum because many Britons have had kind of a change of heart and no longer want to leave the European Union. But Lisa, UK's Prime Minister Theresa May is trying to calm things down, and she says the deal is almost done.
Yes, Theresa May is huffing and puffing, and she says, please trust me. This is the last chapter. We're in the last inning. I'll use the baseball analogy for you, Hal. We're in the last inning, and the details are very difficult to work through. It's very easy to say we're going to make a deal, or we're going to pull out of the EU, or we're going to make, a nuclear arms deal with the North Koreans, or that we're going to sit down with the Iranian regime. But, again, I feel her on this one. I don't think this is an easy change to sort out. In the meantime, those who oppose Brexit have done a great job at instilling fear and uncertainty within the UK, within the economy. I mean, global economy hasn't been doing so great. The European economy has been tanking. And of course, because of those strains, the Brits are feeling that pinch and wondering, is it going to get worse for us? And Theresa May is trying to hold on and say, please just give me a moment. Let me get this all straightened out. We'll have a deal soon. So that's where what we have right now. And I think we've come a long way. So hopefully Theresa May will get her way and be able to sell this to the people.
It seems that our Prime Minister here in Canada, Justin Trudeau, isn't the only one offering up apologies these days. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison offered a rare national apology for the victims of institutional child sexual abuse. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, this was a very interesting, heartfelt moment in which the Australian leader offered this very genuine apology, almost like a across the board apology for anyone who's experienced this sexual abuse in their families. I think given the tone that we have globally right now with this awareness of sexual abuses, I think he wanted to take a moment to say, you know, Australians don't make news much. Let's make some news. Let's put this out there. It was a nice gesture, and I hope a lot of other countries and places like the UN and other institutions that have that platform will lead the way on this, to raise awareness and to hopefully prevent it from happening all over the world. All over the world, this is something that goes on, whether it's within the clergy or at work, at school. You know, you send your child all over the place, and it's really heartwarming to see leaders take the lead on this and to, again, create the awareness that it deserves.
Russia says it would be forced to restore the military balance with the United States if U.S. President Trump carries through on a threat to quit a nuclear arms treaty and begin developing new missiles. Now, how has this gone over in Washington?
Well, this has not gone over so well in Washington on both sides because nobody thinks it's a good idea to stand up to Russia or to China. And Donald Trump does think it's a good idea to stand up to both China and Russia and the Iranian regime and North Korea, and the list goes on and on. So Donald Trump obviously has his own way of dealing with issues. If he's up against a very strong leader, he shows more strength. And in the past, when we've been put up against a strong leader, the United States, particularly in the last 8 years, has shown weakness and more of a backing off and a surrender, or pushing, kicking the can down the road and not dealing with issues right away, which, begs the question, how did we even get here? I think it's because of that weakness that we are where we are with regards to a lot of our foreign policy issues. With regards to Russia, President Trump's shown a lot of strength to say, we will fight you, in the same way, measure for measure, the way that you have put up your cards, basically. And the Russians have done what's good for them at all times. And they don't play by the rules. And they use, cyber terrorism, and they use poison, and they use all kinds of tactics and election meddling. And, there's a long list of not so legitimate moves that the Russians make in order to have their political agenda move forward. So I think Donald Trump standing up to them. In Washington, the reaction is, well, we don't want to go too hard because we might have a worse situation on our hands. And sure enough, the Russians came out with the statement that we will be forced to kind of even out the situation if in fact this is true and that the U.S. withdraws from this deal. In the same breath, though, one of the Russian leaders did say that they are willing to work with the United States to come up with something else. So I think this is a lot of muscle flexing. We cover the news, but this is a lot of muscle flexing, and hopefully at the end of this, we'll see two strong leaders able to come and sit together and explain to one another what their agendas are, what their priorities are, and to have it be a positive outcome for both the Russians and the Americans.
Now, in defiance of UN sanctions, North Korea imported around $640 million worth of luxury goods from China last year. There are signs, Lisa, however, the sanctions are losing steam since Kim Jong-un suspended nuclear and missile tests.
Yeah, these are luxury goods. We don't know if they're fake or real luxury goods because they're coming from China, but that's the headline speaks to a different issue. The headline speaks to the skirting of sanctions and how effective sanctions have been, and how determined the North Koreans and many other nations who are facing Western sanctions are to show us that those sanctions have not worked and that they are able to work around those sanctions. So I think this story speaks to that issue more than anything else, to say that the North Koreans have managed. Every day we have different reports showing whether they are being crippled by those sanctions or whether they're able to skirt those sanctions. So now this is one more example of how they've been able to work around those sanctions, particularly when they find partners such as China that will not obviously honor any Western sanctions whatsoever, especially when it comes to making a deal, making some money. So I think this is going down the line. This also points to the need for very, very targeted and well-enforced sanctions. I think in the example of the Iranian regime, we've come to learn that we can put sanctions all we want, but as long as those sanctions are either being skirted or passed on to a different segment of the population, we really aren't choking the government. And if the goal is to choke the government and their nuclear program, both in the case of North Korea and Iran, then those sanctions need to be very well placed and very well enforced.
There was a big rally in Taiwan over the weekend as several thousand protesters want independence from China. Now, this is one of the biggest demonstrations so far of the year there.
Yes, this is a grievance that Taiwan has had for a very long time. They want their independence from China. And what better time than to do it now when there's global pressure, obviously spearheaded by Donald Trump, the United States, when there's global pressure on China. What a wonderful time for Taiwan to get the headlines and to get the attention for something that they've wanted. Perhaps this will be on the list of grievances, and perhaps their grievances will be heard. This was a very large-scale demonstration. It made headlines, it made Reuters, it made my website. So perhaps this is something going down the line that we can pay attention to.
Now, here's kind of an interesting story. Facebook's WhatsApp has become a political battleground in Brazil's election. Critics warn that it's raising concerns that it is really distorting debate beyond the public eye.
Oh, yes. So this is another hashtag fake news story. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because we have these platforms that do such wonderful work in civic duty, reminding individuals of their civic duty. Meaning, even here in the United States, we have our midterm elections coming up in 2 weeks. There is so much on Facebook and on these different social media apps to remind people to go out and vote. Then you have ads for different politicians on these apps and on these platforms as well. You have different issues being brought up. You have people posting about these different issues. But then the question becomes, how much of it is real? How much of it can we trust? And then when you have people relying on their information on these apps, how unfortunate that they are being fed lies and that they may believe these lies and they may go out and vote based on these lies. So, how can we control this? How can we vet this? It is much larger than anything we can control or vet at this point. But again, I think the good outweighs the bad with regards to social media. In the case of Brazil, they will have to do their footwork on the ground in order to set the record straight.
Thousands of Central American residents who want to enter the United States have hunkered down in shelters in a southern Mexican city. Lisa, the migrants pose a tough challenge to the Mexican government's pledge to stop the illegal travelers' plans to press ahead to the U.S. border.
Yes. So this is a tough situation for everyone, because it obviously speaks to a humanitarian issue, which is obviously something that most people can relate to and want to sympathize with, but more importantly speaks to an illegal issue, and it speaks to a political issue, and it speaks to a national security issue. And Donald Trump was very, very, very shrewd and smart in this way to find a partner in the new Mexican government and to get promises of a very similar ideology with regards to this caravan and how we're going to deal with it. Because Donald Trump got that nod from the new Mexican leader, I think he was more confident that this will be stopped in a way that is best for both Mexico and the United States. the bottom line is that people understand that immigration is a big part of both countries, Canada as well. It's what makes up the West and the way of life and the ideologies that we all believe in and subscribe to. But immigration and illegal immigration are two very different things. And the way that this is being viewed and handled here in the United States, everything, in the past few months has been a political talking point leading up to our midterm election. So whether or not Khashoggi's death is important or not rides solely on the fact that we have an election coming up. This caravan, whether or not to give them, their way and let them in and help them and give them, benefits of any sort will rely again on how people view this for, a political talking point for our upcoming election. And that's unfortunate because these are lives, these are bigger issues. And to see this, immigration and national security in a perfect world would be looked at as a non-partisan issue because it affects the entire country. It affects jobs, it affects national security, it affects housing, it affects the social welfare programs. So I can't wait for the midterm elections to be over so we can go back to life as we know it here in the United States. Of course, we're going to look towards the presidential election, which is in another 2 years, but hopefully we'll get a little bit of a break and we can talk about these issues and how they affect us on a much larger scale rather than just in the scheme of an election.
Interesting how we're always talking about illegal border crossers from Mexico into the United States. And then earlier I've also talked about illegal border crossers from upstate New York into Quebec, Canada. So it's happening just about everywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think everyone can understand.
That's right. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thanks so much, Lisa.
My pleasure.
We've recently seen some job numbers that look very encouraging for our province. Are we back on solid footing, back in black? Is the recession truly over? Joining me now is Steve Lafleur from Calgary, Senior Policy Analyst with the Fraser Institute. Welcome back to BCN, Steve.
Thank you for having me.
Now, there's an interesting article on the Fraser Institute website called The Illusion of Alberta's Job Recovery. Now, so the numbers the NDP government is putting out says, hey, it's very encouraging, the numbers look great, but you maybe have a different take on the issue.
Well, it's certainly true that the overall employment numbers are back to where they were in 2014. The challenge is that a large component of that has actually been public sector hiring. So generally speaking, when you have a large recession where private sector employment significantly decreases, what you want to see in a recovery is an upswing and the private sector leading job growth. The trouble is that hasn't really happened. And in fact, private sector employment is still down from 2014. Whereas public sector employment is up considerably since then.
And I'm glad you brought that up. Government employment increased by 21.5%. That's a significant increase, but some would argue, hey, what's the problem with that as long as people are getting jobs, right?
Well, the trouble is that even if you are in favor of using the public sector to kind of backstop employment during a recession, the trouble is that eventually you need to wean off of that. You can't simply keep doing that forever. And the reality is that we don't know when the next recession is going to happen. We don't know when oil prices are going to increase. At some point, you're racking up considerable debt. So the province is on track for a $7.8 billion deficit this year. The province has run one surplus since 2008, 2009. Even during the height of the oil boom, we weren't balancing budgets. So to say that we can just keep spending money and hoping that will inflate employment is really a short-term strategy with long-term repercussions.
So Steve, are the new government jobs actually necessary? Wouldn't it maybe be better to see more jobs in the private sector?
So it's hard to say, whether an individual job is necessary or not. One thing I'd point to is that the numbers in Saskatchewan, which is also a pretty resource-dependent province, have looked very different. Their public sector employment has been kind of flatter over time, while ours has grown considerably. It's not my place to say whether the government should hire for one particular department or whether, a government-run agency should hire a particular job. But over time, at some point, we need to spend what we make in revenue as a government. And the reality is we're just not doing that. And really, there's no path to it. The government has said continually that they want to balance the budget by 2023-24, but the last fiscal year for which we have concrete estimates, 2020-21, there's still a multi-billion-dollar deficit baked into there. So, and that's even with some pretty optimistic resource revenue numbers. And given the ongoing challenges of pipelines, it's not clear we're going to get that kind of influx of resource revenue. So we really need to be cautious going forward about our public finances. And this is just a sign that we really haven't got the message, I don't think.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. It's been quashed for now until we're able to reach out and do more consultation with Indigenous groups across the country. How much of an issue is that? I mean, we're talking thousands of jobs lost. How much will that impact our economy here in the province?
Well, the provincial government loses a lot of revenue when they're not able to get the full price of resources. I don't know the actual numbers offhand. I do know that within the budget, they estimate that there's for every dollar that the West Texas Intermediate price goes down, we lose about $200 million of revenue. That's a pretty big difference. Now, of course, the price that we get is not the same as that, but that is one way of just showing how sensitive the budget is to resource prices. So certainly getting the full price or close to the full price for our resources is a pretty big priority going forward. If we can't, we especially need to be cautious about running up debt.
Now, getting back to government jobs for just a moment, when a government decides to overhire, is it a bit like a government that prints out more money and says, hey, see, our finances are just fine, everything is cool here?
Well, that has some slightly different implications, but I guess the challenge is that it's not like, we kind of have this idea that goes back to the Great Depression where governments hired a lot of temporary people at very low wages and put them to work to stimulate the economy, but it's not really the same today. If you're hiring significant numbers of people in government agencies, it's not like you're just hiring them and laying them off, whenever the private sector economy returns to its full strength. So it has longer term implications than that. Anytime it's pretty routine for the government in Alberta to substantially increase employment during good years, and then anytime revenue declines, it's controversial to even reduce the growth rate of spending. So the more we increase spending now, the harder it's going to be in the future if we need to pare back.
You have to pay the piper, absolutely. Now, we've touched a little bit on the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, and how that's been quashed for now. But what are some of the other reasons for the private sector employment numbers dropping?
It's really hard to say. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. I will note that while certainly the decrease in oil prices is certainly a huge factor, no question about that. One thing you don't want to do during a recession is increase taxes, especially increase corporate taxes, because if it's already challenging for private sector employers to create jobs in the province, making it even more expensive is probably not a good idea, especially when you don't really generate that much revenue off a corporate income tax increase to begin with. So I think we really need to be cautious about moves like that might seem politically appealing, but really can have some pretty substantial damage for the private sector economy.
And small businesses employ 75 to 80% of Canadians, from coast to coast to coast. So if you increase taxes on those corporations, like you said, or even the smaller businesses, that will impact the economy.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you talk about large companies, the reality is that if you're, a major global oil company, you don't have to invest in Alberta. You can invest anywhere you want. And it's a calculation of risk and reward. If the reward doesn't look very good, then there's always Texas, there's always North Dakota. There are other places where they can park their money. So we're really sensitive to that, especially since we already have challenges with export capacity. We really need to be careful about killing the goose that laid the golden egg.
So does government sector employment increases potentially have a negative effect on economic growth and employment in the private sector?
It's potential over time that public sector employment will crowd out private sector employment for a variety of reasons. So we do also need to be careful about that. But from a public finance perspective as well, we really need to be cautious because we're just not close to balancing the budget. And for all we know, there will be a recession in 2020, 2021. Who knows? There's all kinds of global risk out there. So just saying that we can temporarily run deficits now and eventually things will get better, there's no guarantee of that. Things could get a lot worse even.
So do government employees tend to have maybe better benefits packages and retirement plans than the private sector?
Yeah, I forget the number for this year. We do pretty regular surveys, but public sector employees do have, on average, higher wages compared to their private sector peers. They tend to have more vacation days. They tend to retire earlier. They tend to have more benefits. I believe the wage premium was about 6.9% this year. I could be wrong, but it will be around there somewhere for Alberta. So certainly, we're also, it's not like we're talking about hiring people at the median private sector wage to backstop employment. We're hiring them at a greater wage and also with greater benefits. So it's a costly strategy if the strategy is to simply try to hire through the public sector to smooth out employment levels.
Steve, where is Alberta when it comes to self-employment? Have we seen an increase or decrease with those seeking to become entrepreneurs?
So that's another issue in the job status. So obviously, entrepreneurship is very important to a dynamic economy. The challenge is that often during downturns, self-employment increases for the wrong reasons, where people might not be able to get a full-time job and they might decide to try to stake out their own job. The trouble is that that often means that they're making less than they would have otherwise had they kept the job they had before. So we have seen an uptick in self-employment, which has somewhat offset the losses from private sector jobs, but still is likely not the greatest sign in this case.
So any thoughts on what maybe the province could do to increase self-employment startups?
I don't have any particular thoughts on how to generate self-employment jobs, or whether we should be privileging that over employment in existing firms. The one thing I will say though is that we really need to be cautious and recognize that we don't live on an island. We live in a world of highly mobile capital. We can't just assume that people are going to invest in Alberta because people have invested here in the past. We really need to make sure that we're creating a strong environment that makes it appealing for people to invest here.
And I guess balanced books, that will go a long way to get more and more corporations to want to invest in our province?
Well, certainly, I think if you look at the province's books, so the province up until recently had no net debt, which was an advantage because when you think about it, you could look at public sector debt as future taxes essentially, because at some point you either have to keep servicing the debt or pay it back. And if you're running up deficits consistently, eventually that becomes a problem. Now, we've got some runway before we end up having a problem, but we're increasing our debt so quickly that it's conceivable that over the next decade or so, we'll start to look, more like a normal province in terms of debt, which maybe doesn't sound that bad, but in reality, that's a big advantage that we used to have where we weren't really paying anything to service the debt, where we will be paying substantial amounts down the line.
So would that almost make Alberta a have-not province, if that's the case, if we stay in the red so
well,
much
we'll
longer?
make it a have-not province because we still do have higher average wages than the rest of the country. We do have some persistently high unemployment, but the reality is we generate more wealth. But if we continue to increase the amount that we're paying on debt services, for instance, that's less money we can spend on other things, and that's potentially higher taxes we have to have, which means that it's harder to compete with other places like Texas and North Dakota, where energy companies are free to invest in. A lot of energy companies in Alberta also invest stateside, so it's not that difficult for them to decide to expand in North Dakota or Texas rather than here.
So between now and the next provincial election coming up in 2019, do you anticipate the NDP government will continue to increase the number of government jobs? And if that's the case, where's the money going to come from? More taxes?
It's hard to say. I'm not sure what kind of strategy they have in mind. I'm not sure what kind of needs there are in the public sector. That's kind of a black box. I can't look into individual departments and tell you what their needs are, but I would hope that getting closer to a budgetary balance is something that they'll strongly consider, because if we don't start to consider it now, when will we? Are we going to wait until the next global recession? And if so, then what are our debt levels going to look like 10 years down the road as a result? It could get it could get challenging pretty quickly.
Steve Lafleur, Senior Policy Analyst with the Fraser Institute. Thanks a lot for joining me today from Calgary.
Thank you for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.